y'all. It's Brandon Adams, the host of DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. You'll notice I've got my great-looking tailgate apparel sweatshirt on today. First of all, a little fall weather makes that possible, but also it's because tonight David Green going to be with us at the Marlows in Dunwoody for our DawgNation Big Game preview. It's really the start of our Gator Hater week here as we head towards St. Simons and then Jacksonville on Saturday. The way we kick all that off is at Dunwoody tonight at the Marlows Tavern there. I hope you will be there as a part of it. I'll give you more details on that coming up in a moment. We've also got a busy show today. Mike Griffith coming up here in a minute. The legendary former Georgia quarterback Belue going to be with us later on to relive the great moment from 1980 and to share his thoughts on Jake Fromm and Justin Fields. So we are going to jam as much as we can here over the course of the next hour. We're glad you're with us as DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza, begins right now.
From DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Excited to say here off the top of the program, we are now just 3 days away from the game around here that we believe is supposed to matter for Georgia fans more than any other. Georgia, Florida on Saturday in Jacksonville. 3 days away. We'll kick things off with our Gator Hater countdown right here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. I will also tell you this, that I am thrilled about what's going to happen later on tonight as we kind of get the Gator Hater week rolling here in style at the Marlows in Dunwoody for our DawgNation Big Game preview there. What an exciting time that's going to be from 6 to 8 p.m. tonight at the Marlows in Dunwoody. Of course, I'm going to be there. Jeff Sintel's going to be there. Also, we are so excited tonight to welcome in the former Georgia quarterback as well, David Green, a part of that as well, from 6 to 8 p.m. tonight. Dunwoody location of Marlows, which is 1317 Dunwoody Village Parkway. Once again, the address for those of you listening or on the radio or the podcast, 1317 Dunwoody Village Parkway. It's going to be an awesome night tonight. David's going to sign some autographs, pose for some pictures. We'll do our off-air Q&A the way we always do. We'll have a great broadcast there for those of you that can't be a part of the event there in person. Get a chance to see us do some of this on video. If you're watching right now, you'll notice I'm wearing my Tailgate Apparel sweatshirt. Tailgate Apparel, the company we talk about with David from time to time, we're actually going to have some coupons to give away tonight as well from our friends at Tailgate Apparel. So it's going to be an awesome night tonight, 6 to 8 p.m. at the Marlows in Dunwoody. Of course, if you show up wearing your red and black, you get a complimentary appetizer from Marlows, just like always. Unbelievable night, heading for a great weekend for us. I can't wait to kick things off at the Marlows in Dunwoody. With that out of the way, let me just say this. I continue to be very confident that Georgia's going to beat Florida on Saturday. I have been unwavering in my belief about that really all season long, going back into the spring and summer when we started talking about a lot of these games in earnest back then. I was confident then that Georgia's going to beat Florida, and despite the fact that Florida admittedly has a better record and a better rank than I thought they would be toting into Jacksonville on Saturday, my overall opinion of this game has not changed. I still think this is going to be the kind of game in which Georgia flexes in a way that it really hasn't at any point in time this year. And certainly a stark contrast from the egg that it laid in Baton Rouge against LSU 2 Saturdays ago. I just feel like Georgia-Florida is destined to be very different. And as a way of echoing my opinion, let me also let you hear here from a former NFL great. Randy Cross was a terrific offensive lineman for the San Francisco 49ers for a long time. He is now an analyst for the CBS Sports Network, and on the weekly show that he and Brian Jones and Aaron Taylor and Rick Neuheisel do, where they break down these games from week to week, Randy Cross on that show this week, I thought really laid down his reasoning for why he thinks Georgia's going to beat Florida, and it's very similar to mine. So if you're hearing a bunch of trash talk coming from down in Gainesville this week, listen to this as a way of correcting the record maybe, or reminding you that you haven't completely lost your mind here, and that a Georgia team that has been very much in the thick of the playoff race for most of the season, and certainly thought to be that way before the season began, that things haven't changed that much just because of one bad game. Here's why Randy Cross on the CBS Sports Network thinks Georgia will beat Florida, and I think many of you will agree with this. Take a listen.
Georgia's favored in this game by a pretty good amount, and I think a lot of it people are looking at is they're the number 3 rushing team in the SEC, and Florida has shown pretty effectively they can't deal with the run that well. They're 11th in the SEC, and that's where it's at. In a rivalry game like this, it's about who's the most physical, who deals with that the best, and it's not about the quarterbacks and the toys. No. It's about the line of scrimmage, and Georgia has the edge there.
So it sounds like Randy Cross says that Georgia's going to win this game by having a more dominant line of scrimmage and utilize a stable of running backs that we all around here still feel very good about. And I think most Georgia fans will probably agree with Cross's assessment. Now, not every UGA fan I've spoken to this week thinks Georgia's in good shape against Florida, but certainly the majority seem to, and the majority of people seem to reflect Cross there, who says things haven't changed that much just because Georgia lost to LSU. Although it is fair to point out here that if Randy Cross is going to pick Georgia to win this game by leaning on a running game, it is fair to remember here that Georgia maybe could have leaned on that running game a little bit more 2 Saturdays ago at LSU. That's a bit of a blight on Kirby Smart's coaching record for this season and his offensive coordinator Jim Chaney that they went away from Elijah Holyfield especially, maybe DeAndre Swift a little bit. That's the kind of thing that the Georgia coaches are still having to answer for, including on Monday when once again Smart was posed the question of, hey, why didn't you give more carries to the running backs, Elijah Holyfield included? And, Smart's taking the medicine on some of that, but also pointing towards a better path forward for the future. Here's Kirby Smart on the running game that might very well win the cocktail party on Saturday.
I think anytime you look back, when it's hard when you're behind in a game and everybody wants to talk about that game, but at the end of the day, you got to be successful with the run game to open up play action, to open up passing game, and that's been our identity, being able to run the ball, be physical. That's the strength of our team with our offensive line, certainly running and our backs. I think keeping those guys healthy and using James and Brian in as many situations as possible, who are 2 good players as well, helps us. So we'll continue to do that and do what gives us the best chance to be successful.
Now, Smart mentions James Cook, Brian Herring by name there. Part of the reason why he mentions those 2 by name is because the question from the reporter had asked about Elijah Holyfield and DeAndre Swift. Now, as far as DeAndre Swift's status coming off injury, we'll find out more about that when Mike Griffith joins us a little bit later on. But in the subject of Elijah Holyfield, who I believe could be a central figure in this game on Saturday, should have been more against LSU, probably gets his chance this Saturday against Florida. He certainly seems fired up and ready to go for the opportunity to tote the rock. And in this audio I'm about to play for you from Holyfield early this week, here's something else I want you to listen for here. Listen to the humble demeanor of Holyfield. Listen to the business, workmanlike attitude he takes towards the game on Saturday. That's going to be an important contrast for something else you're about to hear after that. Here's Elijah Holyfield seemingly chomping at the bit for his opportunity to make a big moment in the cocktail party, much like the touchdown run he had last season. Here's Elijah Holyfield.
We have very talented backs, and we have a very, very massive and good O-line. So when you put those 2 together, it'll be good.
Kirby said after the last game, we probably should have gotten those guys more touches. I mean, I guess when you only get 7 or 8 carries, did it feel like, wow, I wish I'd gotten it more? I know.
Yeah, I said I leave that up to the coaches, and when I get the ball, I just try to run hard as I can.
So listen, you love that from Elijah Holyfield right there, this notion of, hey, when I get the football, when I don't, that's up to the coaches. A lot of the media, a lot of fans, a lot of folks like that are going to say, yeah, it was a mistake that Georgia didn't give the ball to Holyfield more last Saturday or 2 Saturdays ago. But Holyfield says, I'm not going to worry about that. I'm just going to put my focus and I'm just going to put my effort towards when I do get the ball, go out there and do the most that I can with it. It's that kind of humble demeanor from Holyfield that I think has made him a fan favorite for really all of his Georgia career and a lot of the Georgia players who fall in line with that. And it's such a stark contrast to Florida, who it finds a way, players in that program, to run their mouths before, I don't know, maybe they run their mouth before every game, but certainly run their mouth before every game against Georgia. And last year they end up looking like fools because of it. Maybe this year that'll once again be the case. You probably by now have known about Rashad Jackson, a Florida defender who had some choice words for Holyfield. Now, you heard Holyfield a moment ago. Very humble, very focused, a chance to go out there and just prove what he's all about. Rashad Jackson, though, on the subject of Holyfield being that physical runner, the way that Kirby Smart described him as, Rashad Jackson looking for an opportunity to kind of prove what he's all about as a player. Here's a little less version of a humble football player doing a little bragging here and maybe setting himself up for a fall. Here's Rashad Jackson.
Holyfield, he like to truck people, and our game plan for that is just this whole week be physical. I mean, we are all linebackers. We are capable of trucking him back, so we got this.
You can see more of Jackson's comments on WSB Game Day coming up this Saturday morning on WSB Channel 2 here in the Atlanta area. But as we said on DN90 yesterday, when it comes to Florida and its defensive players saying that they're going to truck Elijah Holyfield, they better be very careful what they wish for, because I think that Randy Cross to a certain extent is right. I think to a certain extent Kirby Smart knows he was wrong in the LSU game for not featuring Holyfield more than he did. Holyfield is one of these guys that embraces that physical running style. And I think that he's looking to be unleashed on Saturday and looking to show what he's all about. After all, if you want to go back to the offseason here, Holyfield made it very clear that the kind of running game that he's been described as being a part of, the kind of running back that he's been described as being a part of, very physical, to use the word that Jackson used a moment ago, trucking. That's something that Elijah Holyfield certainly loves and certainly embraces about himself. Here's what he said about that in the past.
They always say physical. That's the thing I get the most. I mean, I think it's the way we play at Georgia, and it's the way our program is built. So I enjoy carrying that out on the other team.
He says, I enjoy carrying that out on the other team. I enjoy being physical, and he goes so far as to use a different word. Not just physical, not just enjoying carrying that on the team, but actually being angry. An angry Elijah Holyfield, I think, could be good for Georgia, bad for Florida. Once again, here's Holyfield on that subject.
A lot of times when I get the ball, I am angry. I try to get in the mindset. I wouldn't say angry, it's more of just a mindset.
So, bottom line on all this is, when you hear Elijah Holyfield talk a moment ago, he's humble, he's calm, he's collected. As I said, he's almost like a businessman. But that's not the way that he plays. He's already playing angry each and every Saturday. And with Rashad Jackson saying, we're going to truck this guy, we're going to show you how physical we can be, I think you're only playing into the hands of what Holyfield wants this game to be about. And I think that deep down, Georgia knows they didn't feature him enough against LSU. They're not making that mistake again. And Randy Cross, the former NFL great offensive lineman of the 49ers, turned CBS sports analyst, I think he's right. I think Georgia leans on its offensive line. I think it leans on this running game. And I think it gets another big win against Florida on Saturday. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. Hello to you, no matter how you get here today, live on video, 10 a.m., DawgNation Facebook, YouTube, Twitter feed, radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, podcast form, wherever podcasts can be found, the world-famous DawgNation.com, on SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, the Google Podcast Player. I know we did have a little slight podcast glitch yesterday. I know it was a little later in being delivered. Let me apologize for that. We've got that fixed and corrected. That won't be an issue here today. We appreciate those of you who listen what we think of as kind of the audio on-demand way on our podcast each and every day. We're glad to have you as a part of the program. Really appreciate Marco's Pizza as well for making it all possible. You know, and I saw some tweets again yesterday. Our buddy Mad Dog tweeted at us from the Marco's location. I believe he said he was in Peachtree City, enjoying some great pizza. He said it was a great tasting pizza at a great price. You can't beat that. How about 2 medium, 2 topping pizzas for $6.99 each? That'll get you saying hello, primo. Go to Marcos.com to find out more about that great special offer. And I sometimes I say special offer. It's good enough to be special, but it's actually the everyday low price. 2 medium, 2 topping pizzas, $6.99 each. Check that out coming up at Marcos.com. All right, on today's program, we are very busy. Later on, we're going to welcome in the great, terrific former UGA quarterback, Buck Belue. He'll kind of walk down memory lane with us here on his great performance in 1980. If you're watching on video, you'll actually get to see some of those video highlights from the throw to Lindsey Scott, courtesy of our friends at the UGA Vault. So that'll be a really cool thing. We'll also have Mike Griffith coming up here in just a moment. Also, before any of that, though, let's go around the doghouse here on this Wednesday, brought to you by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. And I want to play one more piece of audio for you. And this comes from the Paul Feinbaum show earlier in the week. It's a former Florida quarterback, Jesse Palmer. Now, I just played you some audio from Rashad Jackson talking about how, Elijah Holyfield wants to truck people. We're going to truck him back. That would certainly seem to suggest a confident player, maybe a little bit like Chauncey Gardner was confident a year ago in some of the swipes that he took at Jake Fromm, only to leave the field embarrassed once the game was over. But Rashad Jackson, no doubt about it, is confident. Maybe a lot of the other Florida players are confident as well. So much so that Jesse Palmer says, going into the game on Saturday, that Georgia, despite having the higher preseason expectations and currently having the higher ranking of the two teams, that Georgia may actually be less confident than the Gators in Jacksonville. Listen to Palmer from the Feinbaum show and tell me, you agree with this?
I think Florida probably is the more confident team between the two going into the game. Obviously, the last time we saw Georgia, it was a 20-point loss at LSU. Meanwhile, the Gators have won 5 in a row. And I think when you look at these two teams right now, I love Florida's defense. They're just so dominant on that side of the ball. They do such a good job, as good as anyone in the country, of getting after the quarterback and creating takeaways. I think that was the biggest takeaway I had from watching the Bulldogs lose at LSU. Jake Fromm really struggled in the first half of that game. He struggled with accuracy. He missed some hots, missed some sight adjustments. And against a defense like Florida, they're going to need Jake Fromm to show up with his A game. I think the one thing I really love about what Dan Mullen's been able to do on offense is he's been able to really kind of establish this physical identity of being able to run downhill and run the ball at will. Jordan Scarlett, LaMichael Pirine, they've run for at least 215 yards now in each of their last 2 games against LSU and against Vanderbilt, and they're going to try and establish the line of scrimmage against Georgia. Their defense missed a bunch of tackles against LSU in that game 2 weeks ago. So, I mean, this is really a swing game for both teams. It's a playoff eliminator, and, you know, I think confidence right now, the edge goes to Florida heading into this matchup. I think at the start of the year, no one would have thought Florida would have had a shot.
Here's what I'll dispute, Jesse Palmer. I don't deny that maybe based on outward actions that Florida looks to be the more confident team of these two. I won't deny that. But what I see coming from Florida, and this has been a consistent theme for the last couple of years, is what appears to be kind of a false, phony bravado. I mean, take a look at a couple of the things that have been said this week. I heard LaMichael Pirine, one of the Florida running backs, saying it was bad play calling that doomed Florida versus Georgia a year ago, essentially playing the blame game with coaches who are no longer there as the reason why Florida lost 42-7. I saw someone else, a Florida player this week, say, it was Jim McElwain saying that he might get fired. Ultimately, he did get fired, but saying he might get fired right before the game that distracted us. It took our mind off the game there, ultimately playing the blame game for why Florida lost 42-7. That's a false confidence. It's certainly a level of confidence. I would suggest it's a false confidence. It seems to be a phony bravado pointing to the fact that the game a year ago may have been closer than the final score indicated. If that's what confidence is, I don't want my team to have any part of that. And I think a lot of Georgia fans are looking forward to seeing maybe Florida put it in its place once again this Saturday. Around the Doghouse here on Wednesdays, brought to you by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. You by now, you know about Engineered Solutions of Georgia. They offer foundation repair, basement waterproofing, and crawl space encapsulation. And they also offer a lifetime of support as well. So give them a call right now. It's 678-ESOG now. That number once again, 678-ESOG now, and have one of their qualified professional technicians come out to check your cracked foundation or your wet basement or your damp crawl space. They'll take care of it all because they are the only foundation repair company with a full-time engineer on staff. All right, great to have you with us here today on DawgNation Daily. It is the former Georgia quarterback Buck Belue coming up later on. Our buddy Mike Griffith right now. Good to have you with us.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Say hello to Mike Griffith, who has had some great stuff at DawgNation.com this week. And Mike, hope you're doing well here today. And if you don't mind, let me start with what I thought was a very interesting piece from you at DawgNation.com, quoting the ESPN analyst Kirk Herbstreit. You had a chance to spend some time with him here this week. And interesting to hear Herbstreit on the subject of the Georgia quarterbacks, Jake Fromm, Justin Fields, which has been, as you know, such a hot topic here over the last couple of weeks. It sounds like Herbstreit is still in the Fromm camp here, not necessarily hoping to see Georgia rush to change, despite what was not a great performance for Fromm or the Georgia offense in particular against LSU. You were there with Herbstreit when he made those comments. What did you make of hearing them and then writing about them at DawgNation.com?
Yeah, I had actually had about a 20-minute call with Kirk earlier this week that ESPN set up. So I had a chance to ask him about the hot-button topics. You know, a lot of times people say, geez, they don't talk about Georgia enough. So when you get an opportunity to talk to a gatekeeper or an opinion maker like Kirk, and BA, I've done a lot of stories with Kirk over the last 20 years, and I think his analysis is more times than not very accurate. So it's intriguing to me to hear where Kirk would be with this at this stage of the season, because earlier this year when I talked with him, he was all about Jake Fromm, and I wanted to see if he was still there. And his analogy was to last year's Auburn game, you know. And he said, you know, last year everybody thought, you know, Georgia wasn't the team they were supposed to be, and you know, Jake Fromm was overrated, and Georgia was able to come out of that game with some changes to their offense and with a different level of aggression. And he said that ignited the rest of their season, and he's expecting that to happen again against Florida, I think.
Yeah, and to kind of follow up on that, Kirby Smart spoke to the reporters again last night, you included, and he continues to discuss Fromm and Fields in terms of how they're doing at practice. And I understand that's what he gets to see the most of. And in terms of snaps taken for both, certainly in the case of Fields, but for Fromm as well, you probably end up taking more practice snaps than you do game snaps over the course of a season. And yet, I think to a certain extent, though, Mike, and I think you'll understand where I'm coming from on this, there's an element of Georgia fans who are tired of hearing about how Fields is doing in practice when it's the games right now that seem to be what really matters here. And in the last game that Georgia played, we saw a lot of Fromm. Some Georgia fans will say they didn't like what they saw from Fromm and wanted to see more of Fields. I mean, what do you make of how Kirby continues to talk about this? His tone really hasn't changed. His manner of discussing this really hasn't changed, despite the fact that it's obvious that the Georgia offense needs improvement if it wants to stay on the playoff path that everyone expects it to be on. But based on the LSU performance, things have got to get better. What do you make of some of the things that Kirby said about that this week?
Yeah, well, the game before LSU, Jake had his best game of the year against Vanderbilt. I mean, he looked great. He threw a 75-yard pass, and he had a high efficiency rating, and basically dissected a Vanderbilt team that was up on Florida 21-3. I thought it was Jake's best performance of the year, and the offensive line didn't play well, and the receivers didn't play well, and we're not talking about benching Andrew Thomas because he got beat one-on-one by a spin move. I mean, Jake didn't have a good game, but really Georgia, period, didn't have a good game. The coaching staff didn't have a good game. Receivers ran the wrong route. Swift dropped the pass. Jake overshot Nicole Hardman. The defense couldn't stop LSU on 3rd and 1 or 4th and 1. It was a bad day. I mean, call it what it was. I mean, Georgia played bad on the road against the number 4 team in the country that had its backs to the wall. This game right here, and, I can understand why Georgia fans would be a little nervous because there's a lot riding on this game, DA. I mean, this isn't just about this week. It's not just about the SEC East. This is about the future of the division. Whose arrow is pointing up? Is Florida going to overtake Georgia? Is Dan Mullen in year one going to pass Kirby Smart? Because if Florida wins this game, now all of a sudden, these thoughts that we had about the Dog Dynasty, they're threatened. I mean, Georgia should win this game. Georgia is the more talented team. Georgia is the better football team, and they've got to put it together. I mean, this is a really a big game for the Georgia football program in terms of what Kirby Smart's trying to do.
Yeah, there's no doubt that's what a lot of Georgia fans are hoping to see happen come on Saturday. And before we get to Saturday and before we get back to Mike Griffith, let me remind you that it's a big day for DawgNation on Friday. It's going to be broadcasting live 2 times from the beautiful King and Prince Resort in St. Simons Island, Georgia. We'll be there for DawgNation Daily that morning at 10 a.m. You'll be able to see that the way that you always do there that day from the King and Prince Resort. And then at 4 p.m. on Friday afternoon, it's our Gator Hater preview. Myself and Jeff Sintel going to be a big part of that. Lots of video footage from great Georgia-Florida games over the years, courtesy of our friends at the UGA Vault. And it's all brought to you by the King and Prince Beach and Golf Resort in St. Simons Island, Georgia. And here's the better news. For those of you who are still making plans about trying to be at the cocktail party this weekend, believe it or not, one of the great resorts up and down the coast there, especially in the Georgia Golden Isles coast, the King and Prince Resort, they actually may still have some rooms left for the weekend, but you've got to act right now. And the only way to get access to the rooms and the great pricing still available is by dialing this number. Let me give it to you here. It's 800-342-0212. The number, once again, for those of us who are listening, either podcast or radio, 800-342-0212. Ask for the dog deal pricing, and you could actually join us there at the King and Prince Resort this weekend as we hopefully celebrate another big win in the cocktail party for the Dogs. And as Larry Munson said, so many years ago, St. Simons Island could truly be a rocket on Saturday night if the news is good there for the Dogs. So we'll look forward to seeing you at the King and Prince Resort. Mike, let me get back to you here and some of the stuff that Kirk Herbstreit had to say beyond the quarterback position. And I thought another quote that you wrote about at DawgNation.com was the whole notion of bouncing back from the LSU game. I won't deny that there is more than just a quarterback position here that needs improvement. I think that the Georgia players and coaches have been pretty, honest about that as well when they've spoken about this over the last couple of weeks. You've been around football for a while. I mean, What have you seen from a demeanor standpoint from Georgia at practice since the LSU game? You've talked to a lot of players. What have you heard from them? What are your expectations in terms of what Kirk Herbstreit has challenged Georgia to do here, which is bounce back from a bad game, I guess, ironically, much the same way it did a season ago after losing at Auburn in November. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, it's the Bulldogs have been poised. I mean, I don't sense a fever pitch, not yet. I think there's a lot of young guys that are looking to their coaches and looking to some of the team leaders for direction here. I think the biggest issue with this team is where's the leadership on defense coming from? It was a concern going into this season, and I feel like it's still a concern. I feel like it's still a question mark. From my observations, J.R. Reed is probably the closest thing to a leader over there. Maybe Jonathan Ledbetter. Those are the two guys that that seem to be taking on that role, and I don't know how vocal they really are, but there's no question how much Georgia misses Roquan Smith. I mean, no one stepped into his shoes, and I feared this. I saw this happen once before. I've seen this act before. Tennessee had a guy by the name of Al Wilson when they won a national title, and they brought back a lot of guys, but without that catalyst in the middle, they weren't quite the same team. And Georgia's got so many talented young players. It's just a matter of time before someone steps into that role. But so far this year, we haven't found that person. We haven't really, figured out who that guy is. Who's that guy? And maybe it happens this week. Maybe it happens in the face of adversity. Kirby Smart says that adversity really reveals and challenges players to grow. And Georgia has had a week and a half to chew on a loss that they really, don't like. I mean, that LSU, there's nothing fluky about it. I mean, they just flat out got beat. There's no denying it. There's no going back saying this player, that player, this unit or that unit. Like I said, Georgia was beat across the board. Coaching staff, line of scrimmage, skill position players. It was a complete and thorough victory for LSU. Now, they play that game next week. I don't know what happens. Florida beat LSU 3 weeks ago. Do I think Florida could beat LSU if they were playing them this weekend? No. But, they did that Saturday. And that's what this game comes down to, is how does Georgia put it together this Saturday? What's the game plan going to be? Is Georgia going to get more aggressive with their offensive game plan? That was something Herbstreit feels like they need to do. I mean, we've talked about that a little bit. I don't know that we can put that on Jake Fromm. He's running the offense that they're coaching him to do. I think you've got to ask questions now about, the change of quarterbacks coach and receivers coach. I'm not sure that, they really should have moved Jim Chaney from quarterbacks coach. So far, the results have been disappointing. I would say not only with Jake Fromm, but, why isn't Justin Fields more developed at this point? Why haven't we seen more from him? And instead of questioning why you're not playing him, question why he's not ready to play. And ask yourself if this quarterback's coach change had something to do with it. I'm sure this is something Kirby Smart's got to look at and address. And, a lot of big picture changes. All that said, BA, if Georgia wins, we're not asking all these questions. If Georgia takes care of business against the Gators, like I think they will, and then they beat Kentucky, like I think they will, then we'll look at the LSU game as a blip on the radar screen. So it's an exciting game coming up. There's a lot riding on it. The Georgia players, to me, it's been a quiet over there. It's been a poise over there. No one looks too bent out of shape. No one looks starry-eyed or scared. It's kind of the next game on the schedule. That's kind of been the personality that Kirby's encouraged them to have.
Sure. And you mentioned the game plan issue. I mean, one of the things we talked about before you joined us is the possibility that Georgia gets back to its roots in terms of running the football again. I know there's been some criticism of Smart and Chaney for not doing that enough against LSU. Some analysts have said that may be what Georgia uses to win this game on Saturday. Do you expect to see more of an Elijah Holyfield, DeAndre Swift if he's healthy? Do you expect to see Georgia lean on its running game more against Florida than it did against LSU 2 weeks ago?
Well, again, and this is what drives you batty, but it depends on Florida. I mean, if Florida's putting 8 guys in the box, then Georgia's going to look to those one-on-one matchups on the outside. I mean, Georgia's going to play percentage football. They feel confident in their skill position players. the running backs, the wide receivers, that they're going to play what the defense gives them. And if the defense is stacking the box, then Jake's going to go to the line of scrimmage and he's going to call for that pass play. He's going to look for Ridley or McCole Hardman or Terry Godwin. And if they're only putting 6 guys in the box and playing 2 deep, then Jake's going to hand off to Elijah Holyfield or DeAndre Swift or Brian Herring. Kirby's not backing off of that. I asked him about the running back, distribution of carries, or I'm not sure, maybe somebody else asked him. I know it came up. But he said if we feel all our guys are pretty similar in talent, we're going to rotate them after 3 or 4 carries to keep them fresh. I'm not sure I agree with that, but you know what? Kirby's the head coach. He makes a lot of money, and he knows a lot more than I do about his football team. And if he says that Harrion and Holyfield and Swift are equal enough in talent that he feels like he should pull them after 3 or 4 carries, who am I to argue? He spends every day of the week with them.
On the subject of...
He live, and then he watches the film, and then he consults assistant coaches that are making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year evaluating talent. So that's the game plan. And it's going to be interesting to see, though, what Florida does, because what Florida does on defense is going to determine what Georgia calls at the line of scrimmage.
Sure. On the subject of Swift, I know he was seen at practice again this week, and Kirby, I guess, says he's going to be fine after apparently dealing with an ankle injury last week. What do you make of the updates you've gotten on DeAndre Swift and kind of where he is here, seemingly – from a Georgia fan standpoint, hopefully not dealing with an injury again, but having to at least address the idea of an injury again after that's been a bit of a controversial subject at times during the season.
Yeah, he looked fine in practice, but, practice and game speed are 2 different things. And, Swift hasn't been 100% all year. I mean, let's face it, that's been one of the bigger problems with this team is, he hasn't looked like the Swift of last year, and that's what's led to the drop-off from there was going to be a drop-off anyway from Chubb and Michelle. Those are fantastic players. Those are generational talents. That's the number 2 and number 3 all-time leading rusher. I feel like every time I say that, I have to apologize. People get mad at me for saying that, but my goodness, Nick Chubb and Sony Michel were amazing talents. Of course there was going to be a drop-off. Now, Elijah Holyfield leads the SEC in yards per carry. He's had a great season, and I'll be honest with you, that's kind of why I question Kirby, and I know this always upsets fans, but I think Elijah Holyfield should be getting more carries than Brian Herring. I think he should have been in the game in the 4th quarter. I have a hard time subscribing to the theory that Brian Herring should have been in there in the 4th quarter getting carries instead of Elijah Holyfield with the game in the balance. I thought Holyfield had run really well. I think he has been markedly the best runner on the team this season. Swift's been somewhat inconsistent. We've seen flashes, but I don't understand why you wouldn't give the ball to the hot hand or to the guy that had the most success. And again, I don't mean to offend any fans of Brian Herring or his family or anything like that, but push comes to shove. There's a reason that a guy's a first-teamer or a second-teamer or a third-teamer. It just seems to me you'd want the best guy carrying the ball in the clutch.
Yeah, that's certainly a fair point, Mike, and that'll be very interesting to see how that plays out come Saturday. We appreciate your time here today on a DawgNation Daily. We'll look forward to reading a whole bunch more from you the rest of the week here at DawgNation.com, and talk to you again on our program very soon.
Thanks, B.A. Take care.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
All right, good stuff there from Mike Griffith. We'll have, don't forget, the former Georgia quarterback Buck Belue on the program in just a moment. Some spirited comments from Mike there on the quarterbacks, Jake Fromm, Justin Fields. Of course, Buck played the quarterback position in Georgia. We'll also find out what he has to say in terms of what we might expect in Jacksonville for both Fromm and Fields. And I've said a lot this week that it would not surprise me at all to see Jake Fromm play much better. And even if Fromm does play better, I still think there could be a role for Justin Fields, an expanded version of the game plan that he's been given thus far this season. So we'll see what Buck Belue says about that coming up in just a moment. Before we get to that, though, I got some news here from our friends at MyBookie. I've been telling you for a while now that MyBookie's giving you that dollar for dollar match on your first deposit. Well, you got to act fast on this because apparently this is the last week here for the dollar for dollar match. Apparently after the kickoffs on Sunday, this thing is going away. So you got to find MyBookie online. It's MyBookie. Find MyBookie online and use the promo code DawgNation, all one word, spelled the way it's supposed to be, DAWG. DawgNation and get your dollar-for-dollar match on your first deposit from MyBookie. But you got to act right now. That's apparently getting ready to go away. For the last time this year, they're getting ready to get rid of that promotion, so make sure you take advantage of that. And if you haven't followed at MyBookie on Twitter or Instagram, you need to make sure you do, because they personally respond to every mention or direct message they get. They also have given away nearly $10,000 in free money to their followers this football season. So find them online from a social media standpoint at BetMyBookie. That handle, once again, at BetMyBookie. You can follow them on Twitter and Instagram and get involved with MyBookie there. And, of course, take advantage of that special offer while you can. Your first deposit match, dollar for dollar. But you got to act right now. Use the promo code DawgNation to take advantage of that. All right. I was reading Jerry Palm at CBSSports.com, who had a very interesting piece about how the first college football playoff rankings could look when they come out next week. Now, don't forget, Palm is making his assessment on the games as they've been played up until this point. There's a huge data point to come as far as games after this weekend, Georgia, Florida in particular here. But with that in mind, there are a couple interesting things from Palm here. The ranking that comes out right before Alabama and LSU play next Saturday, there's a very good chance that Alabama will obviously be number one in the College Football Playoff Selection Committee rankings. There's seemingly a pretty good chance, based on Palm, who's a bit of a number cruncher, that LSU could be number two. So you could have SEC teams at 1 and 2 in the College Football Playoff Selection Committee when their first rankings come out next week. Also, if you keep in mind on that, right now he's got Georgia projected at 7th. Now, that's kind of a misnomer, because the truth is Georgia will either be much higher than that or much lower than that. So let's assume for a moment they beat a top 10 team in Florida, already projected at 7th. How much higher does Georgia move after that? It'd be one of the more significant wins of anybody in that kind of top 6, top 7, top 8 type category. So not only could you have SEC teams, Alabama and LSU, at 1 and 2, but you could also make room for, assuming Georgia wins here, Georgia pretty high up in that ranking. Now, honesty compels me to admit that if Florida beats Georgia, they also stand to get a big-time boost in the rankings and also rank pretty high there. But that could be a pretty interesting thing to see. The other thing to point out here is Jerry Palm is also projecting, and Palm is one of these guys that was probably better in the BCS era, which was a little bit more math-based and poll-based than the selection committee, which is for the playoff, which is a little bit more erratic. Palm was probably a better predictor back then than he is now, but he is also projecting Kentucky into the top 10 also. So here's Georgia. Assuming, as Mike Griffith predicted, that Georgia goes on a run here, it could be top 10 wins for Georgia in each of the next 2 weeks if that indeed does happen. And all of a sudden, the Georgia playoff hopes that seem to be on life support after getting beaten up by LSU. Things could change dramatically here over the course of a couple of weeks. Speaking of LSU, and I meant to grab the screenshot of this to show our video audience. The truth is I just forgot to. But some LSU fans have raised some money and have put up some billboards around Birmingham, Alabama, which is the home of the SEC offices, that says "Free Devin White," the linebacker, obviously suspended for the first half of the Alabama game next Saturday because of a completely bogus targeting call. We joked yesterday about what James Carville, the Democratic political operative, said on the Flying Bomb Show and on the Baton Rouge Advocate about, his belief the SEC and Alabama were colluding together. Now the billboards are up. This is just an example and a reason why I love the SEC so much. I thought the call was terrible, but I love the fact that the SEC fandom here, in this case LSU fans, a group of fans that I don't necessarily generally like all that much, but in this case I'm going to give them some respect. Getting this money pooled together quickly, even if it's completely a futile effort, there is no freedom for Devin White to come. The SEC can't do anything about this. I still like the idea that the LSU fans did this. I think that's kind of cool. And then one more thing to mention here, by the way. Have you noticed there's some talk coming out of Columbus, Ohio about some friction potentially between Urban Meyer, the Ohio State coach, and his boss, Gene Smith, the athletic director? This is to be expected here. Meyer was protected back at the beginning of the season about those terrible allegations against the former assistant Zach Smith. At the time, that seemed like a choice worth making for Ohio State because they thought they were a national championship contender. But on the heels of a Purdue loss, the fact that kind of stuff bubbles back up, that's not necessarily all that much of a surprise there. But Meyer, if he is indeed in some trouble at Ohio State, there could be some ripples around the world of college football. If indeed that is the case, that's probably a story worth watching. We'll make that your SEC through. And before we get Buck Belue here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. Let me remind you of a couple great offers coming up with our friends at Kroger this week only. You can get buy one, get one sale monster savings on items including Edie's ice cream, Oscar Mayer hot dogs, Pepsi, and everything in between from your local Atlanta Kroger. And you can also gobble up on some big savings for the stuff of the trick-or-treaters, whether it be candy, cookies, decorations, and a whole lot more. You can stock up on all your Halloween needs there at your local Atlanta Kroger. So great stuff from Kroger here on a DawgNation Daily, and we'll also get our friend Buck Belue here coming up in just a moment. We'll talk to him about the 1980 Georgia versus Florida game and kind of everything else in between on that. And if you've not been watching our Gator Hater countdowns that we've been doing for you on the various video channels at the end of each day, we've been posting those, I think, at night this week. It's a great way for us to kind of celebrate the Georgia-Florida game, get ready for Friday at the King and Prince Resort, but also look back on some of these great Munson calls, these great videos, courtesy of our friends at the King and Prince Resort. We're going to be there on Friday doing our Gator Hater preview. That's going to be an awesome show. I can't wait to do that. And really just can't wait to celebrate this game. And, I was on with my friends in Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref this morning, and they were joking with me because this is obviously such a big game for me. And I'm glad that people think of me that way. I'm glad that people think of me as the Georgia-Florida guy, the guy that's touted for this rivalry, because I do think there is something to be said for Georgia making this a big-time rivalry and Georgia fans making this a big-time rivalry. I think there's something to be gained from Georgia doing this here, and I'm excited to think about the fact that, at least around the bubble of this show, that's indeed what has happened. So I think that's kind of a cool thing. All right, we're going to get Buck here in a minute. Let me get a couple comments before we do on both Facebook and YouTube. Winston Mock says, had he just walked away, I think it would have been just the 15-yarder. That's Winston Mock on the subject of Devin White there. One way or another, I just think that's a terrible call. And I'm no LSU fan, especially after the way that some of those fans behaved at the end of the game 2 Saturdays ago. I'm no fan of LSU, but I am certainly a fan of seeing football restore and maintain some of the things that still makes it football. I've been very clear here that I think the hysteria about targeting calls and things like that, for the most part, is well out in front of whatever the science might be. That's not to say that I don't think that, there's some dangerous things about football, some dangerous moments here. Not to say that whatsoever. But, this is one of those things where I think sometimes we get a little bit ahead of ourselves. I think the Devin White penalty here is part of the byproduct of the overall hysteria that kind of exists there. Shane Guy says that this week is creeping by. Yeah, Shane, I kind of agree with that as well. I can't wait to be in St. Simons. Can't wait to get there on Saturday. Can't wait for all that. I think that's going to be a lot of fun. Tavares Taylor says, T Stumbles, he likes to be called, says that Alabama's got the voodoo on those SEC refs. They would say, Alabama fans would say something a little bit different here, but I understand where you're coming from on that. Ray Brandon asked about injury updates. We talked about DeAndre Swift a little earlier. It's been written and discussed at DawgNation.com that Ben Cleveland is not going to play on Saturday. That's not something I necessarily expected, but Cleveland's not going to play. Sounds like Mike thinks that DeAndre Swift, for the most part, is going to be fine there. What other update would you want to know on that? Looks like Devontae Wyatt, I guess, is going to come back here on Saturday, be a part of it. It also seems like Jordan Davis is kind of working his way into the rotation there a little bit as well. So we'll see how much of Wyatt's return impacts Davis' playing time, or Davis' emergence may impacts Wyatt's chance to get on the field. That'll be worth paying attention to. Jonathan Corbett asked about DeAndre Swift, and Jonathan, according to what Mike said earlier, and according to what Kirby Smart said earlier in the week, as of right now, the ankle for DeAndre Swift appears to be okay. Let me pop over to YouTube, get a couple comments over there as well, and then we may have to, I guess, move on without Buck. We're not hearing anything from Buck here on that. Yeah, so we hopefully, it reminds me of the joke. Do y'all know the sports radio host Jim Rome, who, back in the 90s, Rome was like the biggest sports radio personality in the world, and he would talk about guests are coming up, and as guests didn't answer the phone calls, he would transition them from, hey, so-and-so is coming up, to so-and-so is scheduled to appear. We may have just transitioned Buck Belue from, hey, he's coming up in a moment, to he's scheduled to appear, but nonetheless, we'll have a lot more with that coming up in just a moment here. Let me see if I can pop us up here on pull up the wrong YouTube here for a moment. Let's see if I can pop us up here. Okay, we got Buck ready to go here. Or we'll pop back in with Buck Belue and get some good stuff with him. And, of course, good to have you with us here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. We'll also have more of your comments coming up in just a moment. Buck Belue is a great former Georgia quarterback and a terrific radio host in Atlanta on 680 The Fan and in Atlanta each and every day from noon to 3 there. Buck, welcome back to DawgNation Daily here, presented by Marco's Pizza. We appreciate your time and hope you're doing well.
Doing well, B.A. Always good to be on with you, man.
Well, I appreciate that, Buck. It's always great to get a chance to talk to you as well. And obviously there's a lot about this upcoming game on Saturday that I want to talk to you about, but it seems like anytime we have you on the week of the Georgia-Florida game, and I know you've been asked about this a million times over the years, it's also a chance to reflect back on that great moment from 1980. And I know that you appreciate this, Buck, and that while you may have talked about this a million times, it's the kind of thing that those of us who now, whether you grew up hearing about these stories from your dad and your grandfather the way that I did, or for the people who may have been there in the stadium there that day, they don't get tired of hearing about that great pass to Lindsey Scott and the terrific call it produced by Larry Munson. I mean, how much fun is it for you to still think back on contributing to what is one of the great sporting memories for so many of the people who are listening and watching us right now?
Well, B.A., just growing up a Georgia fan in South Georgia, it's just truly an honor just to be a part of the Georgia history and to be involved in a play that made so many people happy. It's just such an honor. And, for me as a kid, I never dreamed that big. I thought a little bit, hey, man, I wanted to play for Valdosta High School and be a part of one of those state championships. And, Coach Dooley came down and offered me a scholarship as a sophomore. And, these dreams started coming true. But, the whole thing about that day was just tremendous disappointment was setting in on the sideline as reality set in. Hey, we're running out of time and we're behind here. We've got a chance to win the SEC. Play for the national title here. So let's make some magic happen. And Lindsey Scott, I think the thing that I really appreciate the most is the work that Lindsey and I had put in, throwing the ball, catching the ball, the timing, the chemistry. And so many guys did great things on that play, like Nat Hudson, getting that block that gave me a little more time. And, Lindsey did a lot of the work after that. But we had never talked about this idea. He was on a deep crossing route, and there was an inside linebacker, David Little was his name, and he had settled right in front of Lindsey, and I pointed at Lindsey hoping he would stop, and that's exactly what he did. He had never talked about that, but as soon as I pointed, he stopped, and the linebacker kept moving, and he was located between me and Lindsey. So when Lindsey stopped, the linebacker kept moving, and it gave me that lane, that passing alley to get him the ball, and just to see him running down that sideline was just the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, other than my wife on her wedding day. But that just doesn't get any better than that. After the game, a lot of memories in the locker room there at the Gator Bowl. Irk Russell, on the way out, stopped by my locker and put a big $25 cigar that he was famous for in my coat pocket and said, "Kid, you deserve it."
What a great story. And, of course, on video, we were just showing some of those highlights. If you want to see more of that, you can download the UGA Vault app for free. More than 100,000 people have. And you can relive the Munson call, the great play by Buck Belue, and so many more great moments from Georgia football through the years. And, of course, Buck, the video speaks for itself. Your story explains it well. You were a great quarterback at Georgia. And now Georgia seemingly has two very good quarterbacks on the roster at the same time. But there is, as you know, some debate about how both Fromm and Fields should be used going into Florida, especially given the fact that the offense did sputter a little bit against LSU in the loss 2 Saturdays ago. So if I gave you the power and the control to put one guy in over the other or split the time however you might, how would you handle Fromm and Fields right now?
Well, let me just say up front, I really like both of them. I appreciate the talent, the skill set. I love both of those quarterbacks, and I'm excited about seeing more out of Justin Fields. But I think, to me, a lot of it's fake news. I think it's just propaganda the media has built up, and, it's got the fan base in a frenzy. I just believe Jake Fromm's our quarterback, and Justin Fields is a guy going through a transition of trying to become a pocket passer and a pro-style attack. And that's a transition that Jake Fromm didn't have to make from high school. He ran this offense down in Warner Robins, and then you had Trevor Lawrence running that spread over in Cartersville. And you got Fields making the change from the spread into this. So I think it's going to take a little time. I believe he probably would have gotten in there a little more of a shot in that second half against LSU if he had, at practice, had been performing at a high level. And then the other thing, too, I believe, if it was only as simple as the quarterback not playing well against LSU, I think it was far more complicated than that. Breakdowns on the offensive line. I saw Andrew Thomas get beat on a sack. The receivers not getting open. There were multiple things. You're playing an outstanding defense in their backyard, putting a pass rush on you, and getting tight coverage in the secondary. So I think all those factors added up to the fact you didn't see a lot of Fields. But, I think the craziest thing I've heard since then is Justin Fields from a reliable source is going to transfer. I just shake my head at that notion.
Sure.
I think Fields has a lot to offer, but, when you're down 2 scores, big time on the road against LSU, I'm not sure that's the right time to stick him in there.
Buck, let me finish up with this. I'll admit that Florida has a better record than I thought they'd have, and they're certainly ranked higher than I thought they would be heading into the cocktail party. What do you make of the Gators right now? Is Florida as good as the record and the ranking would indicate?
Well, this is one of those elimination games. It's time to put up or shut up. You lose this game, you're taking a big step back, either team. I think the Gators are just thrilled. Most of, the former Gators I've spoken to, they had confidence in Mullen coming into the opportunity at Florida, but didn't expect quite this turnaround. But Grantham's done a really good job with a talented defense. I know they've lost some of those secondary players to graduation and injury and playing some young guys back there, but Grantham's got that defense playing well, and Mullen has worked magic on the offense. His scheme is so much a better fit for Felipe Franks than what they were doing under McElwain, and it's really transformed this offense. I want to pound it. They got 2 physical running backs, and, I just have to believe that they believe they can run that football inside against us the way LSU did, and that is our weakness this year on both sides of the ball is inside linebacker, and I believe defensive tackle interior there has taken a big step back this year. So I think Florida can run it against us. They believe they can. Hopefully we'll put Reed down in the box, get one more guy in there that they can block, and then get after their passing game a little bit.
He's on Twitter.
Florida has done a great job. They've covered up some of the weaknesses, and that's just good coaching to me.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Buck. I think you're right about that. We can find you on Twitter at BuckBelue8, hear you on the radio every day at noon on 680 The Fan in Atlanta. We really appreciate your time here on DawgNation Daily, Buck. It's always a great thrill to get a chance to speak to you. Thanks for making time for us on what I know is a busy week for you, and we'll look forward to talking to you soon.
Keep up the good work, BA. Go Dogs.
Yes, sir. Good stuff there from Buck Belue, a good friend and a great voice, talking about the Georgia Bulldogs. Really interesting insight on him. And how about that great story going back to 1980? He's been asked to tell that story a lot, but the fact that he still indulges us, for those of us who still have so many fond memories of that, it's kind of a really cool thing. So I appreciate Buck on that. Couple reminders for you here. It's a busy day for us around DawgNation. 3 p.m. this afternoon, we'll have Before the Hedges presented by Kroger, UGA Recruiting Talk. As you might imagine, a good bit on Jaden Hazelwood, his interview with Jeff going back to Saturday. A whole lot more fun and surprises, 3 p.m. Eastern Time on Before the Hedges here this afternoon. And then tonight, hope you will join us at the Marlowe's in Dunwoody, 6 p.m. for our DawgNation Marlowe's Big Game Preview. Myself, Jeff Sintel, also former Georgia quarterback David Green. We've got tailgate apparel coupons to give away, complimentary appetizers courtesy of Marlowe's Tavern, and a whole lot of fun. We'll see you at Marlowe's in Dunwoody, 1317 Dunwoody Village Parkway, tonight 6. Y'all have a great day, everybody. And on video, we got some time for little comments here. We also need to get off the air a little early. I may need to help some of my folks here with some of the stuff we have going on, but that doesn't mean we don't have some time to get into some of this. Mark Godfrey says Buck's a DGD. Totally agree on that. Scott Harris says, enough Hazelwood, please. Well, listen, we got a whole lot of stuff coming up on Before the Hedges. It won't all be Hazelwood. Tavares Taylor says, in 1980, my mom was 12. We really need another national championship. Yeah, T. Stumble, I would agree with you on that. The 1980 starts to feel a little too long away. Miriam Martin Corbin reminds us that Wednesday night here in Georgia is still church night. We need to do Marlowe's on a different night. So next week we're actually at Marlowe's on a Tuesday night. So Miriam, that might be a better one for you to come to. Matt Turner also giving us the and on video catchphrase, which was not something I intended to do, but I started doing it. And it, as I said before, when the show ends, I start saying and on video. And then over the course of time, I started dragging it out more and more and making it into more of a thing. That wasn't my intention. It just sort of, I guess, sort of evolved that way. Oh yeah, we'll talk more about the next Marlowe's coming up later on. Yeah, we don't want to let the cat out of the bag too much about the other stuff coming up as of yet. But nonetheless, Mike Bazell says against Florida, we cannot fall behind at any point in this game because we're going to have a hard time catching up. Yeah, obviously, I mean, that's one of the things that Kirby Smart has talked about, the notion of, not getting behind the sticks and not getting behind the scoreboard, that no offense is perfect in those kinds of scenarios, which is, to a certain extent, probably true, although you hope that Georgia shows enough explosiveness and firepower to be able to do that. The subject of Ben Cleveland came up. Yeah, he was seen at practice, but my understanding is Cleveland's not playing on Saturday. The question comes about Justin Fields and Demetrius Robertson leaving since they're not playing enough. Here's what I'll say about that. We still have a lot of football left this season. And, over the course of, virtually half of October or I guess one game left in October and all of December, I mean, there's a lot, all of November, there's a lot that can still happen. So let's not be too quick to say anything like that's going to happen. Jonathan Corbett asked, did Buck say he heard that Fields is transferring? No, he was responding to the rumors out there that Fields would transfer if he's not playing. So that wasn't Buck saying, hey, I've heard that Fields is going to transfer. But obviously, I mean, you can look at our message board, forum at forum.dawgnation.com, or this comment section every single day. There's a lot of open speculation about who might transfer. And, that's what Buck's responding to. Not any kind of specific credible report, but just the overall, rumors that are out there. Let me pop over here to YouTube just for a moment. Get some more comments over there. Kid says I should call the dogs. I'm probably not as good at that kind of stuff as you might think. There are plenty of other people who are much better at that than I am. Courtney Blackman says, Florida and Kentucky are overrated. We will show the world when we play them. Courtney, I certainly hope you prove to be true about that. It will be a great chance for Georgia to reassert itself here coming up over the next couple of weeks. Certainly hope that's true. Pine Saw Lemon Scent says, just let Fromm finish the season. If we went out, give him as much earned respect and kill the quarterback controversy. If not, open up the competition for serious consideration start next year. So Pine Saw brings up an interesting point about that. And to a certain extent, Fromm is going to have his chance here. And I believe that he's going to make good on that opportunity. But there is still, and I kind of alluded to this with Mike Griffith a little earlier, there is still only so much you're going to be able to learn about Justin Fields from practice alone. Kirby, in evaluating these guys, talks about getting better every day in practice. And I know that's, I know that's a very serious thing with Kirby Smart. You can go so far as to say it's sort of a sacred idea that practice is the way all of that gets determined. However, there is a lot about Fields that people are going to need to see with their own eyes to believe. Is he really inferior as a prospect right now to Trevor Lawrence, who's capable of leading Clemson, a team with a very significant playoff aspirations? Is he that far behind Trevor Lawrence? I think those are fair questions, to be honest. And I think the only way we're going to truly know the answer to that is on the basis of playing time, not just practice time. Ronald Watson says, look at the quarterbacks who've beaten Alabama. All mobile and throw the ball down the field. Fromm didn't do any of that. Right now the sample size of who's beaten Alabama, period, over the course of the last however many years is not very significant. So, obviously we've seen some mobile quarterbacks have success, but I'll also point to Cardell Jones back in 2014, who for Ohio State beat Alabama on the virtue of mostly throwing the ball down the field. So, there are counterexamples to point to as well. Kid says Tyler Clark's going to have a big game. Yeah. I mean, Tyler Clark has shown up big in big spots for Georgia before, and on Saturday that's probably another one. Fox Ninja game. We got another ninja in the comment section on YouTube. That's a lot of ninjas for one comment section. Says BA is going to let BA will Jay Hayes get a chance to play. Yeah, I mean, I still hope to see more of Jay Hayes having a role here. That's another one of those transfers. We talk a lot about Demetrius Robertson, but Hayes, the transfer from Notre Dame, we haven't heard a ton from him yet, and I'd love to see him make an impact. Dapper Dan also mentioning the nice shirt here. This shirt's actually probably even nicer than you realize. It's a cool kind of a faded retro look from Tailgate Apparel. The language right here actually says Junkyard Dogs. That's very comfortable. So I'm wearing this because Tailgate Apparel is going to be with us tonight at the Marlowe's in Dunwoody, so I'm showing off my Tailgate Apparel here. I'm very happy with this, Dapper Dan. Thank you so much for saying that. Uncle D also liking the shirt as well. Uncle, I appreciate that. Got time for a couple more comments. Let me ask Connor. The David Marshall also comes up here as well. What's the David Marshall status update? David Marshall is out. So Marshall's name's come up here a couple times, and he is indeed out. The honest truth is I couldn't remember. But thanks for Connor for collecting that information. Chad Thomas Black says, imagine if Zamir White would have allowed himself to heal. So I don't know if this is an allow himself to heal situation because he actually injured the other leg here. And I don't think there's any medical expertise that would say that he put himself in more harm's way by coming back when he did. But I do often imagine what would Georgia be like if Zamir White was healthy right now. I think an extra running back would help. I do. Especially when you think about the fact that DeAndre Swift's status has been uncertain from time to time, and James Cook is still working his way into a full go situation. An extra running back would have been nice. Casey Coker agrees, says, I wish we had Zamir White. Brian Mills says, Georgia's a pro-style run-first offense. The run opens up the play-action pass. When Georgia gets away from this philosophy, we tend to struggle. The first half of the Rose Bowl, our coaches seem to panic a bit if we get behind or struggle in the run game. So it's that notion of panicking. This is the one thing that I cannot get over from the LSU game. And, even if you read some of the quotes from Kirk Herbstreit with Mike Griffith, he even talked about a 16-point deficit as if it was just 40-0. And, 16 points is 2 possessions when you think about, the benefit of 2-point conversions. I always thought that there was this, or have thought for the last 2 weeks, that there was this overreaction by both seemingly media, maybe fans, Georgia alike, about being down 2 scores to an LSU team that is not good offensively. I don't want to keep relitigating this LSU game over and over, but LSU averaged like 3.5 yards per play against Mississippi State. And Georgia gave up 275 or whatever it was, 250, whatever it was, rushing yards. That is a massive, massive disappointment. I think some of that is based on that Georgia, obviously the truth is probably more complicated than it appears, but the appearance here is that Georgia just got a little panicky about being down 2 scores in that game. And it doesn't look good, even if that's not exactly what it was. James Baldwin talking about David Green being at Marlowe's tonight. David Green is he has a relationship with Tailgate Apparel. That's one of the reasons why we talk about Tailgate a lot. Ken Feinberg says that's because our offense could not stay on the field. That's partially true. There was there were a couple threes and out that became an issue there, but that's also the keep chopping mentality. Matt Rukavina says we're leaving out if we don't shut down their run game. All else is immaterial. Force Franks in the 3rd and long. Yeah, Matt's right about that. That almost any other issue is going to be completely rendered moot if Florida's running the ball the way that some of these opponents have run on Georgia this season. That's probably true. And to go back to the subject of threes and out against LSU, Chad Williams brings up a good point that some of those 3-and-out situations were by throwing the football. That's right. Casey Coker asked about an update on Big Ben Cleveland. Seen at practice this week, but not in a kind of like a full-go situation and not going to play on Saturday. But, certainly optimistic that he comes back sooner rather than later because I do think his return is going to make a big impact on the Georgia offensive line, but it's not going to happen Saturday against Florida. Lee Watson says you don't have enough money. Now, listen, Lee, that's one thing I've never had enough of is money. Always looking for more money. You may be talking to somebody else, but I'll respond nonetheless. I'm always looking for more of that money. All right, let me go over here to YouTube, then we got to get ready to go. Anson McMahon says Zamir will eventually be fine. Yeah, I believe that. I mean, I think that Zamir is a tough, hard-nosed guy, and he's going to work his way back here eventually. Kid says DeAndre Baker is the new prime time, almost. Prime time is a reference to the great former cornerback Deion Sanders from Florida State, played in Atlanta, San Francisco, Dallas, for the younger audience who may not remember as much about Deion. He's for some of our younger audience, you may know him more as Shiloh and Shedeur Sanders' father, as opposed to the great former defensive back. And primetime was a great nickname for him. And you may have noticed, for those of you who've been to some home games this year, that when they announced the defensive starters, that DeAndre Baker, who is for the most part kind of a soft-spoken guy, what is it he says? He calls himself Dream Baker. You know, he, instead of saying DeAndre, he calls himself Dream or something like that. So he kind of gets into the nickname game there a little bit as well. Brandon McMillan says, where are we going to be tailgating before the game? We'll definitely be at the dog walk. We'll definitely be doing some stuff on video inside. That's the problem with like a tailgate. They're going to end up making us work a bunch. I'm not sure how much tailgating we'll do before the game, but we'll try to tweet out where we are. Or y'all tweet us and let us know where you're going to be, and we'll try to find y'all there in Jacksonville before the game. All right, I got to get ready to go. Good comments, y'all. Would love to see you in Dunwoody tonight, the Marlows in Dunwoody, for our Dog Nation Big Game Preview. David Green will be there. It's going to be a lot of fun. Jeff Sintel will be there as well. Speaking of Jeff, we'll have Before the Hedges at 3 p.m. This afternoon, we'll have more Gator Hater video, courtesy of the UGA Vault in the King and Prince Resort. On a video later on today, we'll have DN90. We are just jam-packed to the rafters, as loaded can be. And we're excited to have you here with us as well. We'll see you tomorrow back here 10 a.m. for another episode of Dog Nation Daily Live, presented by Marco's Pizza. Y'all have a great day.